Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. I'm a professor of theoretical physics here at the City College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And today we're going to be talking about the future of humanity with respect to genetics. The book is called Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. And the author we have with us today is Jamie Metzl. He's a futurist, a geopolitical expert, a science fiction novelist, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's been at the White House, the State Department, and the United Nations. And his latest book is called Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. Today, we are talking about genetic engineering. And we're going to go to an imaginary hospital. The year is now 2045. Mr. Metzl has written a New York Times op-ed piece where he goes to a fertility clinic in the year 2045. And we're going to talk about the different options you will have. Is it possible, like ordering a car, to order the different characteristics that you want your child to have? Well, think of the good we could do by eliminating genetic diseases. But think of all the mischief we can also do if we can control our own genetic heritage. And so we'll be talking about the science as well as the ethics of hacking Darwin. So, Jamie, glad you could be on Science Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Michio. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you.
Okay, first question for you is, when you were a young kid, go back now, when you were a young kid, most kids perhaps want to become astronauts or policemen or whatever, but you got into public policy. So what steered you in that direction?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I have kind of a unique and I would say a special history in that my father and grandparents came to this country as refugees after the war, so their lives had been devastated by Nazism. And so I grew up with a very keen appreciation of what can happen when politics goes wrong. And that was really what gave me this passion for human rights and civil rights and governance. And that was my first entry into the world of policy. I worked on the National Security Council. But before that, I had worked in refugee camps in Thailand, working with Cambodian and Hmong and Vietnamese refugees. And that was what also transitioned me into my appreciation that just like governance and policy affects people's lives, science and the values that are realized through science can massively impact people's lives, because we're talking about Darwinian evolution. The Nazis themselves saw themselves as implementers of their interpretation of Darwin.
Now, when we think of public policy, we think of high mucky mucks out there playing a gigantic chess game, China, Russia, the United States, Iran. However, your book is called Hacking Darwin. So what steered you in the direction of looking at the future of genetics?
So more than 20 years ago, I was on the National Security Council, and my boss then and good friend now, Richard Clark, was the person who many years before 9/11 essentially predicted that we would be attacked, and said it would be by a group called Al-Qaeda, and said that we needed to go after bin Laden, but nobody would listen. And he was really a Cassandra. And Dick always used to say that if everyone in Washington was focusing on one thing, you could be sure there was something much more important that was being missed. So more than 20 years ago, I started picking up these little pieces and putting them together into this story that our world was going to change in deep and fundamental ways as a result of the genetics and biotechnology revolution. So I first educated myself, and then I started writing policy articles, and then I was invited to testify before Congress and got more and more involved. And then I realized that in order to communicate the story that I was trying to tell and engage people, I needed to find a different way to communicate. And that was why I wrote the science fiction novels. And then in my book tours for the sci-fi novels, when I explained the science the way a storyteller and the way someone who had taught themselves the self-science would explain it, just like you do, Michio, in your incredible books. I mean, you take this these complex ideas and you translate them so that anybody can read one of your books and say, yeah, I get it. That's also what I have tried to do in Hacking Darwin, to tell the story of the genetics revolution in a fully accessible way so that people who are reading the book can say, hey, this isn't just abstract science. This is about me and my future and my children and my world. And in order to influence how these technologies develop, I need to be informed.
Okay, well, let's talk about the past, the present, and then the future of genetic engineering. About 15 or so years ago, I did a story about a Orthodox Jewish sect in Brooklyn that was afflicted by Tay-Sachs. Tay-Sachs is a horrible genetic disease afflicting European Jews. And scientists have been able to isolate the genes and the markers for Tay-Sachs. And so in this community, they take fertilized eggs that were fertilized in a test tube, analyze them to see which embryos have the Tay-Sachs, which ones don't, and then discard the ones that have the Tay-Sachs. So in one generation, in principle, you can eliminate this dreaded disease. Now, that was over a decade ago. Let's say you visit a fertility clinic today. What kinds of genetic diseases and enhancements are possible? And then we'll talk about the year 2045.
Right. So first, you have to use in vitro fertilization. So the woman has her eggs extracted. The eggs are fertilized with the male sperm. They're grown for about 5 days. And then a few cells are extracted from each of these early-stage pre-implanted embryos and sequenced. And so right now, the primary reason that you would do this and what you can screen for are many of what are called single gene mutation diseases and disorders. So these are things like you mentioned Tay-Sachs, and there's sickle cell disease, Huntington's. There's about 7,000 of these where it's a single letter, a single gene mutation that's off, and that, in many, many cases can cause some terrible genetic diseases. And so there's that. There's chromosomal disorders, things like Down syndrome. And then there's some relatively genetically simple traits like eye color. So that's kind of the suite of options now. But I want to answer. I'll wait for you to ask the next question, but that is about to change in a very big way.
Now, the young couple can then decide which of these embryos they want to put to completion, and they would then disregard all the other ones that have a genetic defect. But what about the possibility one day of curing that defect, rewriting that one letter in your genetic alphabet that is misspelled? Now, is that possible or not?
That's certainly possible. So there's a whole new category of treatments that are called gene therapies, and that is exactly what you've described. And there are two ways to deliver these gene therapies. One is to take cells outside of your body and to edit them, and there's a class of cancer treatments, for example, called CAR T therapies that do exactly that. They take out your cells, in this case blood cells. They engineer them to enhance their natural cancer-fighting superpowers, and then they put these super cells back in your body. And because they're stem cells, these cells proliferate, and your body becomes much better at fighting off cancer. So that's one, is taking your cells out. The other is delivering these new instructions to your cells by a virus, the safe virus, that is introduced into your body. So that whole category of gene therapy is now in its early stage, but that's going to be a very, very significant part of healthcare going forward. But it's not going to be able to fix everything, and so there'll be some of these disorders. It won't be possible to be born and then have it fixed. And for some of those, it will be probably easier just to make sure that when you are selecting which of your your embryos to implant, that one is selected that doesn't have some kind of deadly genetic disorder.
Okay, now that's today. Now, you wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times talking about the year 2045. So in the year 2045, what traits have been identified? They go far beyond looking at Tay-Sachs or Down syndrome or Huntington's. What kinds of traits are possible to isolate in the year 2045? And is it possible to modify our genome rather than simply discarding the embryos that have the wrong genetic makeup?
So let me take a step back to answer your question. So between now and 2045, we're going to shift our healthcare system from our current system of generalized healthcare to precision healthcare. You'll be treated based on your own individual biology when you're getting drugs or whatever. And the way that we're going to know who you are and how to treat you is that you'll have a lot of your relevant information as part of your electronic health records, most significantly your sequence genome. So we will all have our whole genomes sequenced, and the cost of genome sequencing is going toward nothing. And then when we have millions and then billions of people who've been sequenced and we compare what their genes say, their genotypic information, with how those genes are expressed, their phenotypic information, we're going to know more and more, not just about the simple genetics that we just discussed, but about very complex, genetically complex diseases, disorders, and traits. So how is that going to show up in the fertility clinic? So you're going to get there, and first, if you have only 15 embryos, we're going to know a lot, not just about diseases, but about, is this kid have the potential to be great at abstract math, or a great physicist like you, Michio, or a great sprinter. But then we're going to be able to use stem cell technologies, so it's not just 15 eggs, that we're going to be able to take any adult cell, a skin graft is probably easiest. You induce those skin cells into stem cells into egg precursor cells into eggs. Now you have 10,000, 100,000, pick a number, eggs. You fertilize them with the male sperm, and now let's say that's 100,000. You have 100,000 options, and you have an automated process for extracting and sequencing cells from each of those. So when you have 100,000 options, think of what possibility. There's so much variation between possibilities, even for somebody who has 10 embryos. At 100,000, it's a lot more. And then on top of that, we'll be able to do what has already begun. There was the first case of this carried out by a very, in my view, unethical scientist in China, but to go in and make a relatively small and discrete number of gene edits. And so to answer your question, what are the traits that people will be selecting for? And people will certainly be selecting for optimal health. People will be selecting for longevity. And then beyond that, I mean, there are a lot of options that people will have. I think many people will want to select for higher genetic component of IQ, maybe for a greater likelihood to have a more outgoing personality. And so these are big things, and we're touching at the core of what it means to be a human being, and this will raise some very, very deep and profound ethical questions that we're going to have to grapple with.
Now, some ethicists draw a line, and that line is between, on one hand, curing disease, and who could be against that? These diseases are ancient diseases that have afflicted humanity since the dawn of time. Who could be against eliminating those bad genes? However, now we're entering the area of enhancement, that is, making us better people. And, for example, take a look at sports. Already at Princeton, scientists have been able to isolate the Mighty Mouse gene and the Schwarzenegger gene, the gene that makes you muscle-bound. And then the question is, would you pay good money to see a sports team that wins because it's been genetically enhanced? Is that going to be the future of sports? There's no competition. It's just whoever has the best geneticist will win that sports. Will people pay money to see a contest between two genetically enhanced sports teams, knowing ahead of time who's going to win because one team has a better geneticist? What are your thoughts?
So, two really great questions. First, most people, if you ask them the question that you asked, would say, yeah, I have a gut feeling that therapeutic applications of genetic technologies are good, and enhancements are either bad or I'm uncomfortable with them. And if we lived in a world where there was just a clear divide between where therapy ended and enhancement begun, that would be easy. But the fact of the matter is there is no clear boundary. There is a very big gray area between those two. Just to use a very, very simple example, if somebody is having a child and that child is going to be 2 feet tall, and they say, well, we can do an intervention so that kid will be 5 feet tall instead of 2 feet tall. I think most people would say, well, it's really hard to be 2 feet tall your whole life. All right, that seems like it's probably okay. And then you say, all right, what if it's 3 feet tall? And then people say, all right, well, maybe 3 feet is okay. It's going to be impossible to say, all right, here is where the line where therapy ends and enhancement begins.
Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Once again, our special guest today is Jamie Messel, author of an exciting new book. It's called Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. And it's coming. It's coming a lot faster than you realize. The ability to design our children. For the most part, tremendous benefits are going to flow from this, because we're going to be able to eliminate some of the thousands of genetic diseases that have haunted humanity ever since the dawn of time. Horrible genetic diseases. In fact, it's believed that one of the Salem witches, in that infamous Salem witch trial, it's believed that one of the witches, so-called witches, suffered from Huntington's syndrome, which causes you to flail uncontrollably, and people thought she was a witch, and they burned her as a consequence. Well, with us today, once again, is Jamie Messel. The book is called Hacking Darwin. Now, the Olympics Committee has already set up a subcommittee. In fact, we interviewed one of the people who's on that subcommittee to look at genetic enhancement, because there is the Mighty Mouse gene, the Schwarzenegger gene, that's already out there. And drug testing is rather easy to detect by looking at steroid residues in people's bodily fluids. But it's a lot harder when we started to go into the area of genetics and proteins that are created by this. So do you think that this is nothing but the first of a whole slew of different kinds of problems we may face, given the fact that we're now crossing the line between curing disease and enhancing ourselves?
Absolutely, because right now when we look at our athletes, we just assume that everybody is natural, quote unquote natural, because they were born to two parents. But when we're able to look under the hood, when we're able to sequence people, we will realize that there is tremendous genetic variation between us. And there is absolutely no way that anyone can win the 100-meter sprint in the Olympics unless you have the genetic predisposition that makes that possible. There are maybe many people within that range, but there's just no way. It's not going to happen unless you have those genetics. And so when we're able to look at those genetics, we will realize that there are some people who just have a genetic advantage over others. And we saw that in the 800-meter race with this South African runner, Castor. And so once we know this, everybody is critical of someone like Lance Armstrong, who did the blood doping to get so his red blood cells carried more oxygen. But what if we had somebody who we knew was just born with the genetic ability to already do what Lance Armstrong was cheating to achieve? How are we going to think about that? And will it be unfair for people who aren't just born with certain genetic benefits to compete against people who are? It's going to be very difficult to try to figure out what's fair and not fair, and especially as will happen in the coming decades, and certainly centuries, but decades, we are all going to be changing, and we're going to be changing as a result of embryo selection, but in sooner rather than later as a result of gene editing.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Well, with us today is Jamie Metzl, author of an exciting book called Hacking Darwin. What happens if somebody says that they have found a gene for intelligence? There's going to be a stampede. Every parent will be under the gun. There'll be tremendous pressure for parents to enhance their children once the rumor gets out there that their competitors have been enhanced, even though scientists believe that perhaps hundreds of genes influence intelligence. So we have never been able to control the heroin market. However, what happens when genes are nothing but information after all, just digital code. What happens when bootleg genes become available on the internet? How are we going to regulate bootleg genes when we cannot even monitor drugs? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a lot of great questions. First, let me start with the issue of parents. So parents are crazy. Parents will do what it takes to give their kids competitive advantages. I spend a lot of time in Korea, and in Korea I have a friend. He has 11 tutors coming to the house every week to tutor his 12-year-old daughter. In Korea, they have a national law closing the cram schools every night at 10 p.m. because people are sending their 7- and 8-year-old kids to go study past midnight to prepare for exams they were going to be taking a decade in the future. And so parents are going to be aggressive when they believe they can get benefits for their kids. In the old days, we used to think that there was like a gene for a trait, like a gene for height, a gene for intelligence. But now we recognize, as you said, that there are hundreds, probably thousands of genes that say something about an intelligence. And so there's a word that many people, two words that many people haven't heard of that's going to be really important in where we're heading. It's called polygenic scoring. And what that means is that we are going to use big data analytics for these big data sets of billions of people who had their genome sequenced, and we have their information from their electronic health and life records. And so then we're going to recognize very complex patterns of genes that create a higher likelihood of higher intelligence. And so when those tools are applied to pre-implanted embryos that have been sequenced, then where people are going to be able to make pretty informed guesses, but increasingly informed guesses about which of their embryos is likely to have a higher genetic component of IQ. And for those people who want that, those are the ones that they are going to implant. Could there be individual mutations, like a single gene mutation, that could confer some kind of additional benefit? It's possible. But I think the real killer application is going to be in the embryo selection, and parents are going to want it.
Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. Today we're talking about the future. The future is coming faster than you realize. The book is called Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity by Jamie Metzl. And we're talking about now the future. Not today, when we really cannot enhance our genome yet. We can barely identify the misspellings in our genome responsible for certain illnesses. But in the future, some people may declare that they've isolated the smart gene, the height gene, genes that affect even physical appearance. And then who owns a genome? Can you copyright your own genome? What happens if somebody tries to steal your genome by getting you to lick a stamp? They take your DNA off the stamp or off your hair clippings, and they market it. And they make money off your genetics. What happens when that happens? So, Jamie, what are your thoughts about whether or not this technology can get out of hand? Because we already today have people who want to look like movie stars and modify their bodies to look like Barbie.
Yeah, so it certainly can happen, and that's the question that we need to be debating now, is that we know that these technologies have the potential to help us in really fantastic, great ways that everybody will want. But like with all technologies, there is a real possibility of danger. So we need to make sure that we are creating norms and regulations that increase the chances that the good stuff will be optimized and the bad stuff will be minimized. So you talked about getting hair clippings from a movie star, and what I was saying before is people have this sense that we're going to kind of build all our children like at the Build-A-Bear showroom in the local mall, but it's actually going to be a lot more complicated because, as you and your listeners know, biology is extremely complicated. And so what I do think, though, is that once people identify traits that they want that are genetic traits, they're going to be able to select for those traits in their pre-implanted embryos. And if you have 100,000 embryos that you are choosing from, and you value height, or you value symmetrical appearance, or high genetic component of IQ, whatever those things are, you're going to be able to select for them if you want to, and if you're in a jurisdiction where it's legal. And but there are huge privacy issues, and it feels right to everyone, and it is right that people should own their own genetic information. No one should be able to steal your genetic information and use it or profit from it. But at the same time, we are going to need to recognize that the way we are going to be able to use these technologies is if we can build these very massive data sets of genetic and life information, because that's how we are going to crack the code of genomics and our own systems biology more generally. And so we're going to have to find a balance between wanting to have genetic privacy, but not so much genetic privacy that it limits our ability as a collective to benefit from the big data, applying big data analytics to these big genetic and life data sets.
Well, let me ask you a question then. Some people think that one day billions of humans will have their genomes available for research, including the genomes of old people and the genomes of young people, and we'll look at them by artificial intelligence, scan these genes using artificial intelligence, and isolate where aging takes place, and then be able to fix it using CRISPR technology. And some people think that the fountain of youth may actually be found by artificial intelligence, scanning billions of genomes, looking for patterns that indicate premature aging or aging in the genome, and maybe the fountain of youth is inside our bodies. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I fully believe that. And right now, there are a lot of studies of these superagers, these people who live past 100. And it turns out that if you live past 100, your healthcare costs in the last year of your life are 30% the cost of somebody who dies in their 70s. And so we are increasingly going to understand what are the genetic patterns that help some people live longer, healthier lives. And so one thing we're going to be able to do is, once we've identified those genes, is say, well, what are those genes doing? Because as you mentioned earlier, Michio, genes instruct cells to make proteins. So maybe, and what we will be able to just introduce those proteins as if you had these kinds of genes. And certainly when we are selecting our embryos, having future children with a greater than otherwise chance of living a longer, healthier life will be something that will be important to some people. So I absolutely, there's no reason, the longest lived human ever lived 122 years, but there's no reason that I see that we aren't going to be able to live longer than that and certainly extend average life and health span.
And let me ask you a hypothetical question. You're also a science fiction novelist, and in science fiction there's a philosophy called transhumanism. In fact, there are some people who actually subscribe to it, and they think it's a good thing to modify the human race. What's wrong with becoming smarter, better looking, better people? What's wrong with enhancing ourselves? And one day we're going to go into outer space, and we're going to have to genetically modify ourselves to live on Mars and beyond. So what are your thoughts about the philosophy called transhumanism?
Well, I know the transhumanist movement very well. I know many of the people who are involved in it. And I think it's a very legitimate philosophy for them. But not everybody believes that. And I certainly believe we know that this planet isn't going to exist forever. And and then we're going to have to live somewhere else for humans to survive, and we won't be able to do it with the genetics we have. We know that the planet is getting hotter. And so that's a very legitimate philosophy, and there are some people who are religious conservatives who think that this is quote unquote playing God and we shouldn't do it. And we need to build a table big enough for everyone so we can all be part of the process of figuring out how to best use technology.
So Jamie, thank you so much for being on Science Fantastic. Once again, the book is called Hacking Darwin: Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. And you've been listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku.